The wind cut through the land like a whip, cold and unforgiving. It lifted the dust and scattered it across the road, catching the hem of Evelyn Holt's coat, pressing against her like a reminder of how far she'd fallen. She walked slowly, shoulders hunched, with a baby wrapped in a faded blanket against her chest. 3 small children trailed behind her, their faces pale and their clothes barely clinging to their thin bodies. The train station was long behind her, the last place she had hoped for a miracle. No one had given her a second glance. The grain elevator man had turned his back before she finished her sentence. The grocer had done the same. Even the priest at the church had refused to meet her eyes, his hands shaking as he set down her offering with a tight smile. 4 mouths to feed, too many to ask for help in times like these. She had nothing left to offer, no more pride, no more hope, and no place to go. Evelyn's boots dug into the dusty earth as she walked, each step heavier than the last. The day was empty, but the weight of it pressed down on her. The baby whimpered softly, her small body warm against Evelyn's chest, but Evelyn couldn't soothe her. Hunger was a burning ache that curled in her belly, tight and unforgiving. She hadn't eaten since dawn, and even then, it was only scraps. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Kansas, to the house she had left behind, where she once had a life. Her husband's silence echoed through her mind as the road stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving. He had just gone. No warning, no goodbye. Just an empty house and the bitter taste of abandonment. Her fingers tightened around the worn handle of the suitcase, but she didn't let herself break down. Not in front of them. Not in front of the children. Not now, she whispered under her breath, trying to steady the tremble in her hands. The sun was dipping lower in the sky, and the horizon blurred with dust. The wind whispered old memories as it swept across the plains, pulling the weight of her past along with it. The road curved out of town and into open land, stretching wide and empty. It was the same land her husband had once talked about, fertile soil, great for crops. But now, it was only a barren stretch of wheat and earth. The sound of a diesel engine rumbled behind her, low and steady. Evelyn didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She had been ignored enough times to know when someone was just passing by. But then the truck slowed, the rumble quieting until it stopped beside her. A voice called out, soft but steady. "You all right?" Evelyn didn't lift her head. She couldn't. Her throat was dry, her chest tight. The man took another step closer, his boots sinking into the dirt, but he didn't crowd her. His voice was calm, but it held something. An understanding, maybe. Or maybe just the kind of kindness that came with not expecting anything in return. "I've got a ranch a little ways up the road," the man said. "If you need somewhere warm, I can give you a ride." Evelyn finally lifted her head, her eyes meeting his, but she said nothing. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across his face. But she could see the weathered lines there, hard and steady. His eyes were dark, but not unkind. The wind picked up again, tugging at her hair, but she didn't move. The children stood close behind her, quiet, still, their wide eyes locked on him. The man didn't say anything else. He just waited. He didn't rush to help, just stood there, offering a moment of silence between them, as if giving her the time to make up her mind. Evelyn glanced at the children, who seemed to sense something in the air. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. But then, with a small movement, she nodded once. She picked up the baby, then the suitcase. Slowly, she started walking toward the truck. The children climbed in first, their small hands gripping the side of the bed. Evelyn followed, and the truck rumbled to life beneath them. The warmth hit her like a wave as she settled into the seat, but she forced herself to keep calm. The man didn't speak again as they drove, the silence hanging in the air between them like a fine thread. She could hear the children shifting, the soft sound of breath, the quiet rhythm of the road beneath the tires. It was only after they had driven for some time, when the mountains began to rise ahead of them, that the man spoke again. His voice was low, but it wasn't unkind. "What can you do?" It wasn't a question meant to judge, just curiosity, a simple inquiry, as if he was trying to understand what parts of her had been left intact. Evelyn hesitated. Her mind worked quickly, running through the list of things she could do, things she had done before the world had turned on her. "I can cook," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Clean. Mend what's torn." She paused before adding, "I can hold 4 children in my arms and still chop firewood." The man nodded once, a simple gesture that said enough. He didn't need more. It would do. As they continued toward the ranch, Evelyn felt a strange sense of stillness settle inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something else. Something steady, like the land beneath them. The ranch came into view soon after. The buildings were low, sturdy, set against the backdrop of the snowy mountains. It was small, nothing grand, but it felt real, solid. Evelyn didn't let herself hope. She just looked at it, her fingers still clutching the suitcase, her mind working hard not to expect too much. Luke Holstead didn't speak as they drove closer. He just kept his focus on the road ahead, guiding the truck toward the small buildings that would be their shelter for the night. Evelyn didn't speak either. She just watched the light in the windows, listened to the sound of the wind sinking through the wire fences, and held her children tighter. They had made it this far. What would tomorrow bring? The night fell quickly, the dark sky stretching above them like a heavy blanket. The ranch was quieter than Evelyn had imagined, the wind softening as it swept across the fields. She stepped out of the truck, her legs stiff from the long ride. Luke Holstead didn't say much, just handed her a ring of keys and pointed toward the bunkhouse. "You'll find water by the pump," he said simply. "If you need anything else, just ask." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight with gratitude, but she didn't speak. The children were already inside, their small bodies huddled together on the cot beneath a thick quilt. Evelyn set the suitcase down by the door and, without another word, took the baby from her hip, easing her gently onto the blanket beside her siblings. The air inside the bunkhouse was cold but dry. A small stove sat in the corner waiting to be stoked, and a single lantern burned low on the table. The smell of cedar lingered in the walls, mixed with the faint scent of the wood and leather that filled the ranch. She stood there for a moment, staring at the children, her heart heavy. They had made it. At least for tonight, they were safe. But she didn't let herself feel the relief. Not yet. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, or how long they would stay here. They couldn't stay forever. Her mind wandered to the months behind her, to the places they had been, to the hands that had fed her children, the corners where she had begged for scraps, the promises made by men who never followed through. And now here she was, in a stranger's bunkhouse with no promises, no money, just the slow, uncertain rhythm of survival. The children were already asleep, their breathing steady and soft. Evelyn sat on the edge of the cot, the baby nestled in her arms. She closed her eyes for a moment, but sleep didn't come. Not yet. She had made it this far. But was it enough? The thought gnawed at her. The man who had stopped for them, Luke, he had given them a chance. But was that kindness or just a temporary solution to a problem he didn't want to see? There were no answers yet, only the steady sound of the wind outside and the quiet rhythm of her children's breath. Evelyn woke early the next morning, before the sun had even started to rise. The chill in the air bit at her skin as she stepped outside, pulling her coat tighter around her. The grass was thick with frost, each blade sharp and brittle beneath her boots. The barn loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the pale sky. Luke was already there, lifting feed sacks into the barn. His movements were steady, purposeful, not rushed. Evelyn watched him for a moment, the quiet of the morning hanging between them, before she stepped toward him. He glanced up as she approached, his eyes unreadable. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep but steady. "You ready to start?" Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. The cold seemed to seep into her bones as she followed him into the barn. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Maybe warmth, maybe a sense of security. But there was only work. Luke showed her the chickens first, how to rake the coop and hold the feed bucket without spilling. She watched his hands closely, memorizing the small gestures, the way his fingers moved with certainty. as if this was something he had done 1,000 times. And maybe he had. Steady, he told her when she fumbled, her grip slipping on the bucket. He stepped back, not scolding, but showing her again. Evelyn nodded, repeating the motions, her hands trembling just a little. She had done hard work before. She had fed her children, scrubbed floors, carried firewood. But there was something different about this. Something raw and honest in the way Luke showed her without expecting anything in return. By noon, the children were following her around the ranch, whispering to the goats and gathering eggs. The youngest had fallen in the mud and was crying, his face streaked with dirt. Luke handed him a carrot, patting his head gently. "There's no shame in getting dirty," Luke said, his voice soft but firm. "The world's got worse things than mud." Evelyn stood off to the side, her heart aching for her children. But there was something in Luke's words, something that made her feel like she had been carrying this weight alone for far too long. The afternoon stretched on, the chores blending together until her hands were raw and her back ached. But there was something different in the air now. Something honest in the way the work flowed, in the way she moved from one task to the next. It wasn't the constant ache of worry anymore. It was real. It was purposeful. When the sun began to dip low in the sky, Luke set a pot of stew on the stoop, along with some fresh bread. A small note about fixing the fence the next day. Evelyn held the note in her hands for a long moment, tracing the edges with her fingers before setting it down. The children were already sitting around the small table, eating, their faces tired but content. Evelyn joined them, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the wide expanse of land beyond the ranch. She wasn't sure if she was afraid to hope, or just afraid to let herself believe that this was the place where they could stay. It was too soon to tell. That night, as she lay on the cot, the weight of the day still settling in her bones, she thought of the future. The quiet, steady rhythm of the ranch, the way the land seemed to hold its breath. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't running anymore. She was standing still. And that, she realized, was enough. The days moved with an easy rhythm, slow and steady. Each morning, Evelyn woke before the sun, tying her hair back with the same piece of string she had used for months. The cold air greeted her as she stepped outside, the frost on the grass cracking beneath her boots like brittle glass. Luke was always there first, working quietly, his hands moving with purpose. Never rushing, but never wasting time. Evelyn had learned quickly. The chickens were no longer a struggle. She could rake the coop with ease, feed them without spilling a single grain. She had even begun to feel a connection to the land, a quiet understanding of how it all worked. The rhythm of the animals, the cycle of seasons, the simple effort it took to keep things moving. The children were getting used to the ranch life too. They spent their days running with the goats, playing with the chickens, and helping with the chores. They had a new routine now, a new kind of normal. They still missed their father, but the fear in their eyes had softened. They no longer huddled together at night, waiting for the sound of footsteps that would never come. Evelyn watched them, her heart swelling with something she didn't recognize at first. It was peace. It was the first real peace she had felt in a long time. Even though the past still lingered in the back of her mind, it was becoming less heavy, less sharp. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Luke handed Evelyn a small tin of beans and a worn tin cup, passing them to her without saying a word. She took them quietly, her fingers brushing against his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sun had just set, the sky still painted with shades of orange and pink, the land stretching out before them in the fading light. "You've been a big help," Luke said at last, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Evelyn looked at him, his face bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. There was no need for more words. She understood. They both understood. The quiet hung between them, a shared acknowledgement of the strange, unspoken bond that had formed over the last few weeks. Luke hadn't asked her to stay. He hadn't demanded anything. He had simply offered what he could, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn didn't feel like she was burdening someone. She felt like she was contributing. As the days passed, the work continued. But there was something different now. Evelyn wasn't just surviving. She was starting to live again. She woke each day with a purpose, and each night, she fell asleep knowing that the next day would bring something new. Something small, something simple, but something real. One afternoon, Luke and Evelyn stood side by side, mending the fence near the orchard. The wire had slipped in places, and the posts were crooked, like an old man who couldn't stand up straight anymore. It had been a long job, but they were nearly finished. Luke handed her a glove with one finger missing, and she pulled it on without comment. They worked in silence for a while, the sound of the hammer striking the posts, echoing in the quiet air. When the wire slipped again, Evelyn caught it, steadying it with both hands. She felt Luke's presence behind her, his steady, strong hands on the other end, but he didn't take over. He let her hold it, let her find her footing. She glanced up at him, catching a glimpse of the deep scar at the base of his thumb. It was an old wound, weathered and rough, like the land itself. But Luke didn't speak of it. He didn't need to. When the fence was finally fixed, Luke handed her the hammer and leaned against the post, looking out over the orchard. "Some things just stick to your bones," he said, his voice quiet. "The land, the people, the work, it all gets in you." Evelyn nodded, her eyes following his gaze. She understood. Everything in this place had become a part of her in a way she couldn't explain. That night, as they sat in the small kitchen, Luke set a bowl of soup in front of her, along with a piece of bread. He didn't say anything. He just watched her for a moment, and then turned away. Evelyn didn't ask why he was being so kind. She didn't ask for anything. But there was something in the way he looked at her, something in the way he treated her, that made her feel safe. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't worried. She looked at the children who were already eating, laughing together. They had found something here, something that Evelyn couldn't name. Her mind wandered to the letter she had hidden in the drawer, the letter from her husband, demanding that the children be returned to him. Evelyn hadn't told Luke about it. She hadn't wanted to burden him with it. But she could feel the weight of it, sitting there in the drawer, heavy and real. She didn't want to think about it, but the thought kept coming back, the fear that one day she would be forced to leave, forced to go back to a life that had nearly broken her. But she couldn't. Not now, not when they had built something here, not when they had finally found a place that felt like home. The next day, Luke came to her as she was finishing the chores. He stood there for a moment, watching her work. When she looked up, he was holding a small wooden box. "I carved this for you," he said, handing it to her. Evelyn took the box, her fingers brushing the smooth wood. She didn't know what to say. The box was simple, but it was the first gift anyone had given her in years. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight. Luke nodded, his gaze meeting hers for a brief moment. He didn't say anything else, but the weight of his gesture hung in the air between them. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt something stir inside her. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was something. Something that told her for the first time in her life that maybe she could stay. Maybe she could belong. Spring arrived slowly, like a weary traveler making its way through the valley, creeping across the land with a gentle touch. The frost began to melt, leaving behind the soft green shoots of new life. The fields turned from brown to green, the earth waking from its long, cold sleep. Evelyn spent her days tending to the garden, planting seeds that would soon sprout into food for the coming months. She had learned to plant in rhythm with the land, knowing when to water, when to wait. The children helped where they could, their laughter filling the air as they ran through the freshly turned soil. Luke worked beside her, steady as ever, showing her the small tricks of ranch life that could make the work easier. They had grown used to each other, the silence between them no longer heavy but comfortable, like a well-worn coat. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep shades of pink and orange, Luke sat beside Evelyn on the porch. The air was still, the only sound, the quiet hum of the evening. He didn't speak for a long while, and neither did she. They simply sat, watching the world settle into night. When Luke finally broke the silence, his voice was soft, thoughtful. "How's your boy doing with that book?" Quote. Evelyn smiled, her eyes softening as she thought of her son, sitting in the corner of the bunkhouse with the tattered book Luke had given him. "He's trying. He's sounding out words. It's slow, but he's learning." Quote. Luke nodded, his gaze turning toward the land, toward the stretch of wheat that was just beginning to show promise. "He's a good boy. He's got his mother's grit." The words hung in the air for a moment, neither of them rushing to fill the silence. Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest, the ache of something unspoken, something she didn't know how to name. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves in the trees and carrying the scent of the earth across the porch. Evelyn shivered, but it wasn't the cold that made her skin prickle. It was the quiet intimacy of the moment, the way she and Luke had found a way to stand together in silence, understanding each other without needing to say a word. The next few days were filled with the steady rhythm of work, feeding the animals, mending fences, tending the garden. But there was a change in the air. Something in the way Evelyn moved, in the way she carried herself. The weight that had been there before, that invisible burden of fear and doubt, was slowly lifting. She didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way she had started to believe that she might just belong here. One afternoon, Luke asked her to help him fix a section of fence near the orchard. The wire had come loose again, and the posts were leaning. The wind had picked up, the sky growing darker with the promise of rain. They worked together, Evelyn holding the wire while Luke hammered in the posts, his movements steady and sure. It wasn't hard work, but it was necessary. It was the kind of work that kept things from falling apart, that kept everything in balance. When they finished, Luke stood back, his hands on his hips, looking at the fence. "That should hold," he said, his voice low. Evelyn nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "It will. The land's a little wild, but we're making it ours." Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, his eyes steady and searching. There was something in his gaze, something she couldn't quite place, but it made her heart beat faster. "You've done more than just help, Evelyn," he said quietly. "You've made this place home." Quote. She swallowed, the words settling deep in her chest. Home. It felt strange to say it, to think it, but it was true. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an outsider, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She felt like she was part of something, part of the land, part of the life they had built together. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "I never thought I would, but I think I have." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. But Luke didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, looking at her as if weighing the truth of her words. Then he stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward her. "You've earned it. You've earned more than just a place to stay, Evelyn. You've earned a life." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as his hand brushed hers, a simple gesture, but one that held so much weight. For the first time, she felt something shift inside her, something deeper than the work, deeper than the survival. It was the feeling of being seen, of being acknowledged for all that she had done, for all that she was. Luke didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His hand stayed there, resting gently in hers, as if offering her something more than just his help. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel afraid. The next morning, as Evelyn worked in the garden, her mind kept drifting back to Luke's words. They had been said without expectation, without pressure, but they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from the sheriff in Kansas. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat as she saw the official seal. She didn't need to open it to know what it was. A letter from her husband, demanding custody of the children. Evelyn sat on the porch with the letter in her hands, staring at the words without really seeing them. She could feel Luke's presence behind her, but she didn't turn around. Not yet. The future she had built here was suddenly fragile again, a flicker of hope that threatened to fade. But Evelyn didn't let the fear take over. Not this time. She stood up slowly, folding the letter neatly and slipping it into her coat pocket. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going anywhere. Days blurred together, the steady rhythm of ranch life grounding Evelyn in a way she hadn't thought possible. The spring rains came and went, the crops began to sprout, and the children's laughter became a constant presence in the air. Luke remained a quiet presence by her side, always steady, always there, but never pressing. Evelyn felt the shift inside her, a change she couldn't quite explain, but one she could feel in her bones. She was beginning to trust the stability around her, but the letter from Kansas still weighed heavy in her pocket, like a stone she couldn't shake loose. She hadn't told Luke about it. She didn't want to burden him with it. What could he do anyway? But every time she saw the children playing in the field or watched them fall asleep at night, the thought gnawed at her. Her husband's words echoed in her mind. "I want them back." Quote, "It was the law. Evelyn knew that. She knew it was her responsibility to protect them, to keep them safe. But something inside her twisted at the thought of returning to the place that had almost destroyed her. One evening, as the sun sank low in the sky, Evelyn was in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal for the children when Luke walked in. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, his hands resting on the doorframe, watching her as she worked. Evelyn didn't look up. She didn't want him to see the uncertainty in her eyes. "You've been quiet the last few days," Luke said softly, his voice low like he was treading carefully. "Is everything all right?" Evelyn paused, her hand stilling over the pot of stew she was stirring. The warmth of the kitchen, the soft crackle of the fire in the stove, felt like a small comfort, but it couldn't push away the cold weight of the letter. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "Just tired." Luke didn't say anything at first. He just stepped closer, his boots quiet on the wooden floor, until he was standing behind her. His presence was a steady warmth, a reminder that she wasn't alone. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, the touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry everything by yourself, Evelyn," he said quietly. "If there's something you're afraid to face, we can face it together." She closed her eyes, feeling the pressure of her own breath, the weight of everything she hadn't said. Finally, she turned, meeting his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "I got a letter from Kansas. My husband wants the children back." Luke's brow furrowed, his face hardening slightly. "He doesn't have any right to take them." Evelyn shook her head, a tired smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "He still has the law on his side. It's his word against mine, and I don't know if I can win that fight." Luke took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers. "Then we'll fight together, if it comes to that." The words hung between them, a promise and a question all in one. Evelyn had been on her own for so long, fighting battles that never seemed to end. But here, with Luke, there was something different, something steady. Her heart skipped in her chest, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let the quiet weight of his words sink into her. "I don't know what I'm doing, Luke," she whispered. "I don't know how to make all of this right." "You don't have to make it right all at once," Luke said gently. "Just one day at a time." And in that moment, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but it was something like it, something that made the future seem just a little less frightening. The next few days passed in a blur of work and quiet tension. Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about the life she had left behind, and the future that was uncertain. But each time she looked at the children, each time she watched them playing in the yard, laughing together, she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't go back. Not now. Not after everything they had built here. That afternoon, as she and Luke worked on the fence near the orchard, Luke spoke again, his voice low but firm. "We'll do what we need to do. If the law wants to take the children, they'll have to get through me first." Evelyn stopped, her hand resting on the worn post she was holding. She turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly, her voice thick with gratitude. "You've already done so much." Luke's gaze softened, but he didn't hesitate. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for them. They're my family now." The words hung in the air, a simple truth that Evelyn hadn't expected, but one that settled in her chest like the weight of a promise. The children had found something here, something real, something lasting. And so had she. Later that evening, as they sat around the table, eating supper in the dim light of the lantern, Evelyn felt a sense of quiet acceptance settle over her. She was here, with these people, with this life, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The letter from Kansas still sat in the drawer, untouched, but Evelyn didn't feel the same dread when she thought about it. She had something now, something worth fighting for. The next day, As Evelyn was working in the garden, Luke approached her again, this time with something in his hand. A small bundle of wood, carefully carved into the shape of a tiny pair of boots. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the wooden shoes, delicate and well-made, each curve and line perfect in its simplicity. "Just in case," Luke said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn took the boots from his hand, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. She couldn't speak, not at first. She simply held them, feeling the weight of Luke's gesture, the quiet understanding between them. Her heart swelled with something she couldn't name, something that made the future feel a little less uncertain. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Luke nodded, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together." Quote. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that, maybe, she wasn't so alone after all. The days seemed to stretch on forever, each one blending into the next, a steady rhythm of work, care, and quiet moments. The ranch had become more than just a place for Evelyn. It had become her home. And as the seasons shifted, bringing the harsh winds of winter and the promise of new life with the coming spring, she felt a sense of permanence here, something that had eluded her for so long. But even in this new life, there were shadows. Evelyn couldn't ignore the letter from Kansas. It still weighed heavy in her chest. And though Luke had promised to stand by her, the fear of losing the children lingered like an unspoken truth. Every time she looked at them, playing in the yard or sitting beside her at the table, the thought gnawed at her. Could she really protect them if it came to a fight? Could she prove to the world that she was the one who deserved them? She didn't have all the answers, but she had this life, this quiet, steady rhythm that Luke had shown her. And with each passing day, she felt more certain that she couldn't let go of it, not without a fight. One evening, as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the small bunkhouse, Evelyn sat by the fire with the children. The warmth of the flames flickered across their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. Luke was outside, working late, but Evelyn didn't mind the silence. The children had grown more comfortable here, their laughter a constant presence in the air. She watched them now, each of them growing stronger, more confident. They were her world now. It was then that Luke came in, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his coat dusted with snow. He hung his hat on the hook by the door, his face set in the same quiet determination that had become so familiar to her. "Everything all right?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft as she looked up from the children. Luke nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "Just checking on things. It's a long winter ahead." He stepped closer, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, looking into the fire. But Evelyn could feel the weight of his presence, the quiet strength he always brought with him. "The lawyer's coming next week," Luke said, his voice steady but serious. "We'll do what we have to." Evelyn didn't respond right away. The thought of a legal battle, of fighting for her children, stirred something deep inside her. She didn't want to lose them. Not to a past that no longer felt like hers. "They'll fight for them," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "My husband's a stubborn man, and he's got the law on his side." Luke's hand found hers, his fingers warm against hers in the cold room. "You've got more than just the law on your side, Evelyn. You've got love, and you've built a life here that's worth fighting for." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Evelyn couldn't ignore. She looked at Luke, really looked at him, and saw the quiet determination in his eyes. He wasn't just offering her help, he was offering his life, his heart, everything he had. And it wasn't something she had expected, but it was something she needed. "I never thought I'd have this," Evelyn said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd always be running." Luke squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a slow, comforting motion. "You don't have to run anymore. Not here. Not with me." The fire crackled in the background, the sound filling the quiet space between them. Evelyn felt her heart settle, the weight of her fear and uncertainty beginning to lift. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but with Luke by her side, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone. The next few days were filled with preparations for the lawyer's arrival. Evelyn spent time gathering the papers she needed, making sure everything was in order. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread each time she looked at the children, but she didn't let it show. They were still hers, still under her care, and she would fight to keep it that way. When the lawyer arrived, he didn't waste any time. He was a stern man, his eyes sharp as he went through the details of the case. Evelyn sat quietly by his side, Luke beside her, offering silent support. The lawyer's words were blunt, but they didn't seem to faze Luke. He was calm, steady, his presence a quiet strength that Evelyn had come to rely on. As the lawyer left, Evelyn felt a sense of finality settle in the room. There was nothing more to do but wait. The judge would decide, and she would have to live with the outcome. That night, as the wind howled outside, Evelyn sat by the fire, the children asleep in their beds. Luke was beside her again, his hand resting on hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "We'll get through this," Luke said, his voice steady as he looked at her. "Together." Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew this. She would never give up on this life, on these children, on this love. She had fought too hard to get here, and if it came to it, she would fight until the end. The letter came a week later, just after the first snowflakes began to fall. Evelyn opened it slowly, her hands trembling as she read the words. The decision had been made. The judge had ruled in her favor. The children would stay with her. For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe. The fear that had been a constant presence in her life began to lift, replaced by something new, something unfamiliar: hope. She looked at the children, their faces illuminated by the light of the fire, their laughter filling the room. They were hers. They were safe. And for the first time, Evelyn felt like she could stay. She could belong. Luke came into the room, his eyes meeting hers. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. Evelyn smiled, the weight of the past finally lifting. "We won, Luke. We're a family." Luke stepped forward, his arms wrapping around her as he pulled her close. "Yes, we are." And in that moment, Evelyn knew that this was just the beginning of a life built slow and steady, full of love, of hope, and of the kind of peace she had never thought possible. The future was hers, and she was ready for it. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Archives of the Wild West, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.